Hi guys, welcome to the webinar by Loctopus. We'll be starting sharp at 5. You guys are all on mute. If you wish to ask a question, you can post it on the chat section or the Q&A section, which is there on the screen.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar with Mr. Abhinav Sharma. We'll be discussing about the pre-trial concepts in a criminal proceeding. It was Abhinav who approached me, on LinkedIn for this webinar, and it's great to hear and read his views on LinkedIn about some of these topics. Uh, I also wanted to welcome you all, and I hope all of you are doing well. You are keeping safe at your homes. Abhinav, if you could quickly introduce yourself to our viewers.
Yes. First of all, a very good evening. I am Abhinav, and I am practicing in Delhi and Chandigarh. And I completed my law from Campus Law Center, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. Before that, I completed my BTech from National Institute of Technology. Uh, Before starting, I would like to thank Loctopus for organizing this and for this opportunity. And this topic, pre-trial proceedings, it's a very vast topic, and couple of things before I start. It's extremely difficult to discuss each and every topic in pre-trial. I'll come to what pre-trial is, and my attempt will be to touch only the important and the crucial topics as far as criminal proceedings are concerned, and we'll try our best. So should I
Right,
start?
right, Abhinav. Also, guys, we have around 940 participants for now. Some of your friends, some of your peers might not be able to join the webinar because the limit for this plan is 1,000 participants. Anisha, are we going live on YouTube with this?
Tanuj, I'm trying to be live on YouTube. There is some issue with the link. I'll just quickly get back.
Sure. So yes, as I can see, we might exceed the 1,000 participant mark. We are trying to go live on YouTube. This is the first time we are trying to go live on YouTube. So if your friends or peers who want to join this webinar who are not able to join through Zoom, please tell them to check the YouTube link. We are trying hard to make it work. With that, it's over to you, Abhinav.
Yes. So let's start. So the topic for today's discussion is pre-trial concepts. So before I discuss the topic, it's important to understand the meaning of pre-trial. In a very simplified manner, I would say pre-trial is whatever happens in a criminal proceeding before a trial starts. That is what you call a pre-trial. And I must assure you that a lot can happen. Now, a natural question that everyone would ask me: when does a trial start? Now, if we have to answer this question, it's important to uh, discuss or possibly mention a Supreme Court judgment. I'll just share that judgment, the citations with you. Yes. Yes. If you can see, these are the list of judgments. So if you see this point 6, this is Hardeep Singh and others versus State of Punjab and others. And the citation I've mentioned there, you can note the citation. What this judgment says is that trial commences only when the charges are framed, and it's not when the magistrate takes cognizance. So you have to understand. Let me just yes. So you have to understand that in a criminal proceeding, a lot of things happen. I'll discuss all those events. When charges are framed, it is when the trial starts in a criminal proceeding. And I've already mentioned that Hardeep Singh versus State of Punjab, it's an important judgment. It also discusses section 319 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. You can just go through that judgment. It's a very well written, good judgment. Now, couple of things before I go into the finer aspects of pre-trial. Now, pre-trial becomes important for various reasons, and it's crucial also because it lays the foundation on which your trial takes place. If your pre-trial is shaky, I will assure you that your trial is bound to fail. And for defense lawyers, it is a phase. It is a phase in a criminal proceeding to find your loopholes in the story of the prosecution and benefit the accused. Pre-trial, obviously, there are a lot of topics. I mean, it will start from before, I would say, registration of the FIR, and then in registration of the FIR, then entire investigation that is conducted by the police, and then possibly when the case goes to the magistrate in the form of a final report, a lot of things would happen. But as I've stated, that I'll only restrict myself to the important topics. Now, whenever you read a criminal procedure or criminal law, you'll find that there are a lot of conflicting judgments of various courts. We'll have various high courts saying one thing or the other. You'll also find conflicting judgments in Supreme Court as well, or in Supreme Court judgments as well. And that is where, it sometimes becomes very difficult to understand the law, but it becomes extremely easy, I would say. It's very easy to argue the law. Difficult to understand, but argue, because then, if we want to argue from the prosecution side, you have one set of judgments to support. If you want to argue from the prosecution side, of course, there'll be another set of judgments. So becomes difficult to understand the law when conflicting judgments are there. You'll find a lot of even recent judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court clarifying the law on certain aspects. And then another aspect is your Article 21, which is very important. I must tell you, Article 21 of your Constitution of India. I would also suggest, whoever is attending this webinar should have one criminal procedure or criminal manual with yourself, because I'll be referring to certain sections. Of course, I'll show those sections on the screen, but if you have the criminal procedure code or the criminal manual, well and good. Now, Article 21, why it's important and why it is important in a criminal proceeding. See, our judicial system, or the way our judicial system works, is based on many basic principles. Two of the basic principles I'll list here. One is free and fair trial, and the second is innocence unless proven guilty, or innocent unless proven guilty. So every person is assumed to be innocent unless proven otherwise. That means, and I'll again just sort of uh, rephrase Article 21 in a way that Article 21 guarantees the right to life and personal liberty, which can be taken away only by a procedure established by law. That means it guarantees right to life, it guarantees personal liberty, but you can take away these things from a person only by a procedure established by law, and this procedure has to test these constitutional values, these constitutional articles, and therefore many a times, I would say, uh, you will face with a problem that you are not able to resolve a particular section. Even the judges do that. They will read that section with Article 21 and then resolve the ambiguity. The recent judgment, I would say, Asian resurfacing is a recent judgment of 2018, a very good judgment, I would say. And then last year, possibly, Justice Nariman's judgment, um, Hira Bhai, Manu Bhai Malviya, I'll mention that judgment also later on. It discusses Article 21, imports the concept of Article 21, and then decides the relevant section. So Article 21 becomes very crucial as far as criminal proceedings are concerned. Now, there are various topics that I had shortlisted. So we'll discuss these topics one by one. Let us first come to our first topic, which is the FIR, which is also known as, we may also call it, a first information report. Now, practically, all these topics, I'll discuss all these topics practically. We'll have to understand one thing. What is the relevance of FIR and all those things? Let's say a crime takes place and you go to the police and you give all the information to the police, and the police records that information, and you say that so and so crime has taken place at X location, Y location, and I saw this person, I saw that person, and according to you those people were involved, etc., etc., and you give all this information to the police. Police will record it, and this documentation of your statement or your information in the police register or in a particular format. So nowadays we have integrated investigating forms. If you this is a good research point. I mean, if you go online and you'll research on integrated investigating forms, you'll see that a lot of standard forms are given by the government on the basis of certain committee reports and all those things. So that standard is there. The police will record that information in that particular standard. That is called your first information report or the FIR. So this, and remember, this is the first information report. First means first, and the word is important because when I come to the topic of, let's say, second FIRs, this first information, two FIRs on the same incident becomes very important. So once you have your FIR, what does it do? It will set the criminal machinery into motion. So this is the starting point where criminal proceedings will start. Practically how it happens? You go to the police, an FIR gets registered. See, understand, you have to understand one more thing. When you give an oral or possibly a written complaint to the police, and the police stamps your written complaint and gives you a diary number, that document does not become an FIR. So on the basis of that criminal complaint that you give to the police, the documentation which the police does on its standard formats, that is called the first information report. Your criminal complaint or your document is not the FIR. So many a times I've seen people giving written complaints to the police and getting the DD number, and they tell me that, sir, this is the FIR that I've registered. So you don't register the FIR, you give information to the police, police will register the first information. So this is how I understand it. People may have different opinions, but I've seen that police will not register the FIR. Police will simply take your complaint and then proceed. If it registers, it will give you a number, the Thana number or the police station number, and then a date will be there. There'll be a lot of lot of subtopics, columns would be there. You'll have to see the FIR format once in order to understand how a first information report is. Now, when that FIR is registered, the case is marked to an investigating officer, an officer who will now investigate the offense. That person is called the IO or the investigating officer, and he will investigate the offense, and he will do a lot of things. He will go to the crime spot. He will collect evidence. He will take statements. He will talk to people. He will take statements of witnesses. He will take statements of people who might be involved in the offense. He will send certain articles to forensics, etc., etc. So a lot of things have to be covered by the investigating officer. And if you see CRPC, if you see your CRPC, a lot of sections are there wherein police investigating officer will, let's say, ask summon documents from people or possibly arrest a person, etc., etc. All these things he can do. So we will not discuss about the arrest and section import of section 91 and all those things, because as I said, you cannot touch all the sections in a 1 to 1.5 hour discussion. So that is the job of an investigating officer. He'll do these things. He'll collect the evidence and possibly do many other. Many a times you will see that the FIR will not have the names of any accused person, because if an informant or a person who knows or who has seen that offense, he does not know. He has probably seen a dead body on the road. He doesn't know who, if that is a suicide case, if it's an accident, or if that person has been murdered. He simply gives that information to the police, and the police registers an FIR. So many a time police will register an FIR against unknown person. So that column will be left blank, and police will now investigate. So police will now investigate and find the real culprits. Now, when I talk about first information report, it's important to understand section 154 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. If you have section 154, well and good. Otherwise, I'll open it on the screen. Again, this is your section 154. Again, I'll not go into all the nitty-gritties of section 154, but the important part is information in cognizable offense, section 154. Every information relating, so it talks about information. There is no mention of first information report or FIR in section 154. Every information relating to the commission of a cognizable offense, if given orally to an officer in charge of a police station, shall be reduced to writing by him or under his directions and be read over to the informant. And every such information, whether given in writing or reduced to writing as aforesaid, shall be signed by the. So the important word here is this. This is the important word, shall. So that means in a cognizable offense, it's mandatory for the police to register an FIR. So I'll again come to the now a lot of people would ask me what's a cognizable offense, and so again I'll not go into the details. In order to understand a cognizable offense, very simplified, in a very simplified manner, you have to look at your first schedule in the Code of Criminal Procedure, or the corresponding act in which that offense has been mentioned. You see the first schedule or that act, it will be mentioned whether it's a cognizable offense or a non-cognizable offense. And in such cases, the police can arrest without warrant or without the orders of the magistrate. If I further simplify it, and if you see the broad I would say, meaning of a cognizable and a non-cognizable offense. Cognizable offenses are largely those offenses which are serious in nature. Non-cognizable offenses are slightly less serious in nature. This is a broad classification. Again, there are many ifs and buts. I mean, when I'm having this discussion or when I'm having this webinar, I am not expecting everyone to believe that the law is so simple. There will be lot of ifs and buts. You have to understand. So broadly speaking, cognizable offenses are those which are serious offenses. Non-cognizable, less serious, more in the nature of private wrongs, I would say. And for that, you'll have to take orders from the magistrate before proceeding. Section 154. Then there is one important, another section 154(3). I'll come to that later on because I have to discuss other things also with respect to that section. When I'm talking about section 154, you cannot discuss 154 without discussing one of the most popular judgments, I would say, of the Honorable Supreme Court, that is Lalita Kumari. So if you need the citation, I'll give you that citation on your screen. Yes. So Lalita Kumari versus Government of Uttar Pradesh. This is the citation on registration of FIR. Let me just, yes. Couple of guidelines. This is a very important case. Again, don't have to go into the facts. I'll tell you the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is, or certain guidelines were issued, and those guidelines are that registration of FIR is mandatory. So that word shall in section 154 has been interpreted, and the Supreme Court says that registration of the FIR is mandatory if the information discloses a cognizable offense. Number one. So if the information given to the police discloses a cognizable offense, you have to register the first information report. Number one. Let me just open the chat box also. Yes. Registration of FIR is mandatory if it discloses a cognizable offense. Cognizable, serious offenses. Section 2C, possibly Section 2C of your Code of Criminal Procedure. You can have a look at Section 2C. Yes, cognizable offense. Yes. You have to register an FIR if it discloses a cognizable offense. And no preliminary inquiry has to be done if it discloses a cognizable offense. If the information given by the informant does not disclose a cognizable offense, then what police can do, that it can initiate a preliminary inquiry in order to ascertain whether it's a cognizable offense or not. If after inquiry the police comes to a conclusion that yes, it's a cognizable offense, then they have to register an FIR. But if it comes to a conclusion that no, it's not a cognizable offense, they will inform the informant with reasons. Now, what is the objective of preliminary inquiry? Preliminary inquiry here, I mean, there are very specific guidelines. Preliminary inquiry here would mean to ascertain whether a cognizable offense is made out. You don't have to ascertain the veracity of the offense, only whether a cognizable offense is made out. And then Supreme Court said that preliminary inquiry can be done or should be done in these cases. For instance, matrimonial matters, corruption matters, medical negligence, etc., etc. So a list is given at the end of the judgment. You can have a look at the judgment. So these are all serious offenses where the court felt that preliminary inquiry has to be there. Of course, a time-bound inquiry has to be there. Then the everything has to be recorded. So these are the guidelines in Lalita Kumari, and these are very important. You will have to read Lalita Kumari again and again throughout your criminal career if you are practicing on the criminal side, because it's a very important judgment. A lot of follow-up judgments have been there. Different courts have interpreted Lalita Kumari in a different way, but you must read. Now, another practical problem that comes when you want to register an FIR is when you go to the police. When you go to the police and you tell the police that please register a first information report or please register an FIR. Police, practically speaking, is not very much interested in registering these FIRs because of various reasons. These are one of the problems in our police system, I would say. So they have a lot of reasons to reject your demand for registration. What are generally I have seen that in civil transactions, if there's a case of 420 and some exchange of money is there, so what they will say that it's a civil dispute. Or in other cases, they'll say, no, this offense, we cannot investigate this offense because this offense has not occurred in our jurisdiction. So please go to some other thana, some other police station. So these are some of the reasons of rejections which the police would give you because they are not very much interested. And the reason for that is that police feels that if they don't register a first information report, they will project that the crime rate in that locality or that concerned thana, around that concerned thana, is low, which is, the legal term for that is burking. So less FIRs would mean lower crime rate, or they would expect that, okay, let us not register an FIR because there will be some other remedies available to the complainant if they don't register the FIR. This is a problem in our police system. I think this has to improve. Now, as far as the jurisdiction part is concerned, jurisdiction, when the police will say, though we cannot investigate this offense, you have to go to some other thana. A recent judgment of the Honorable Delhi High Court on zero FIR becomes very important. The name of that judgment is Kirti Vashisht. I'll again, I think a lot of people have requested that I should share this PDF. I'll do that. Let me just have a look at this. Yes. So point number 5, Kirti Vashisht versus State and others. This criminal MC number 5933 of 2019 on zero FIR. So this is a very important judgment. People should read that judgment because two important directions were given by the Honorable Delhi High Court to the Police Commissioner, Delhi Police, because this is a Delhi High Court. And those directions were, number 1, if a complaint of a cognizable offense is received in a thana and the offense according to the police has occurred in some other jurisdiction, then you please register a zero FIR and then transfer it to the concerned. So you cannot say you simply cannot say no, we will not do it. You register a zero FIR and then you transfer it to another police station. Secondly, the Honorable Delhi High Court said that if complaint is closed for any reason, it should be informed to the complainant. So you will have to inform the complainant that your complaint is closed without any delay. And so zero FIR is, I think, now clear with everyone. So even if the jurisdiction issue comes up, the police is bound to register a first information report if it discloses a cognizable offense. Right? So this is your section 154. Now, consider a situation where the police station also does not register a first information report. Then what is the remedy for you? You look at section 154.3. I hope everyone can see this. 154.3 says, any person aggrieved by a refusal on the part of an officer in charge of a police station to record the information referred to in subsection 1 may send the substance of such information in writing and by post to the superintendent of the police concerned. So basically, if the police station or the SHO does not register your first information report, you write to the DCP. In commissionerate system, for instance, in Delhi, you'll have the DCP. In other districts, you have your superintendent of police. You write to the superintendent of police, and you annex the complaint given to the police station. And this has been mandated in section 154(3) of the Code of Criminal Procedure. So 154(1), police station, you go to the police station. 154(3), if no FIR, go to the SP or the DCP. If he also does not entertain you, and of course he will not, because this again problems in the policing system. A lot of applications go there to the DCP and all. So FIR, getting an FIR registered is a problematic issue, and there are some things which as lawyers, you can take care of. So that's why no FIR in the police station, no FIR pursuant to writing to the DCP. Then your third option is moving an application under section 156(3) of the Code of Criminal Procedure. Section 156(3), I'll come to section 156(3). Says police officers powers to investigate, but important part is this: any magistrate empowered under section 190 may order such an investigation as above mentioned. So 190 is your section pertaining to cognizance. I'll come to cognizance also later on. So you approach the magistrate by filing an application under section 156(3) of the Code of Criminal Procedure. And 156(3) is one of the most important topics, I'll say, practically also and theoretically also, because there are a lot of things in that topic. So how do you do that? Question comes, which magistrate? So this will be filed before an Ilaka magistrate. Ilaka means that English word would be the territorial jurisdiction of a particular magistrate, under whom or under which that particular police station falls. So if you, let's say, if you have gone to X police station and the police station does not register your first information report, you will have to see the concerned Ilaka magistrate or the concerned magistrate, and that is where you file your 156(3) application. And you'll have to, if you go to your subordinate judiciary's website, you'll see that every magistrate, especially in Delhi, I would know about Delhi. In that website, you'll have a lot of the names of the magistrates are given, and the corresponding jurisdictions are also given. So X magistrate will take care of these police stations. So you'll have to see, okay, this is a case of, let's say, X police station. Then you see that this falls in under that particular magistrate. You file your 156(3) there. Now, when I talk about 156(3), another Supreme Court judgment, a very important Supreme Court judgment, which is Priyanka Srivastava and others. This is the 9th. Priyanka Srivastava and others versus State of UP and others, 2015, 6 SCC 287. It's a Supreme Court judgment. And 2-3 important points in Priyanka Srivastava. It says that all the applications, 156(3) applications, are to be supported by an affidavit. Because earlier, what used to happen, that people used to move their 156(3) without a supporting affidavit. So only a petition or an application under 156(3), no supporting affidavit. So court wanted to segregate frivolous litigation or frivolous 156(3)s from the serious litigations. So they said that to please, from now on, you will have to annex a certificate, affidavit, along with your 156(3) application. And secondly, of course, the objective was to make the applicant or the complainant more responsible in saying things. I mean, obviously, if he's saying something on affidavit, he'll be more responsible. Then, before approaching the magistrate, you will have to go to the concerned thana, 154(1), then your DCP, 154(3), and then you will come to the magistrate. So this process has to be followed. This was given in Priyanka Shrivastava. Now, practically speaking, many a times people just simply go to a police station and then after that directly file a 156(3). So depends on the magistrate, depends on the facts of the case. Sometimes magistrate entertain, sometimes they will not entertain. So the moment you move your 156(3), generally on the very first day, the magistrate will call for a status report from the investigating officer or the concerned investigating officer or the station house officer or the SHO. Now, just a practical aspect. Whenever you are moving an application under 156(3), you will of course make police as a party or the concerned SHO as a party, and you will also mention the names and addresses of the accused if you know that. But the notice will not go to the accused. So accused will not get an opportunity to come before the magistrate and defend the 156(3). No, he cannot do that, because at this point of time, the accused does not have a right to hearing. So no notice will go to the accused person. So whenever a 156(3) is being argued or is being it's filed, it's only you, the honorable magistrate or the learned magistrate, and the police, the investigating officer. Or these three people will be there, and you have to argue a 156(3) application to say that there has to be a direction to the police to register a first information report. But important part is, if your 156(3) gets dismissed, let's say for some reason, and you challenge that order in the appellate court, let's say, then in that appellate court proceedings, notice will go to the accused. Because when your 156(3) was dismissed before the learned magistrate, a right accrued in favor of the accused, and he is bound to defend that right in the appellate court or the superior court, I would say. So notice will go to the accused when your 156(3) gets dismissed. There are various judgments on this issue, and normally the practice is also that the concerned appellate court or the superior court will send a notice to uh, the accused person. Now another aspect is that many a times when you file your 156(3) application and you want to argue, let's say, on certain things, the magistrate feels that in this case I am not interested in sending it for registration of FIR because I don't feel this FIR is required in this case. Magistrate in those cases will direct you to chapter 15 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. Chapter 15 is your complaints procedure. So according to the magistrate, couple of reasons would be there. Magistrate feels that you please come for the pre-summoning evidence. So when chapter 15 or complaints procedure, it starts from section 200 of your Code of Criminal Procedure. I'll not go and discuss 200 right now, but you have to understand, and it's important also, that section 200 is a complaints procedure. What's a complaints procedure? I'll come to it later on. But it's the discretion of the magistrate to send you to the complaints procedure rather than sending the complaint or the application to the concerned thana for registration of FIR. So this is a discretion with the magistrate. If you see 156(3), I'll come to 156(3). Any magistrate empowered under section 190 may order such an investigation as above mentioned. The word is may. Now, this may is very important because courts have held in number of cases that this direction under 156(3) is not mandatory. It's the discretion of the magistrate. And if the magistrate feels that in this particular case no investigation is required, then he is not bound to send your complaint for registration of FIR. Now you see that conceptual difference. When you approach the police with a cognizable information that a cognizable offence has taken place, police is duty bound to register a first information report. The word there is shall, but the moment you come here under 156(3), because now there's a judicial mind, and judicial mind will do a lot of things. So the parliament or the lawmakers, they have not given any part to the police to decide whether to register a first information report or not in a cognizable offence. But here, before a magistrate, the magistrate will have a discretion either to dismiss your 156(3) or send your complaint to the complaints procedure. So let us now come to the complaints procedure. Now, let me come back. Yes. Yes. So, what is the complaints procedure? Again, it's I'll sort of simplify it.
Abhinav, if it's okay, could we answer some of the questions maybe which you found interesting, or if you want, we can proceed.
Let me see if there's something. Sir, it is a 04 case. Can we register a complaint when rejected to lodge for? So I've already answered that. He's asking for which magistrate. I think that's his question. So I've already stated that you have to see the Ilaka magistrate or the concerned jurisdictional magistrate, and you move your 156(3) application there. At what stage of the investigation is the notice given to the accused under section 156(3)? So that also I've already told that, in 156(3).
Can you check the Q&A box?
Where is it?
There's a chat box and there's a Q&A box right next to share screen option.
So everyone is asking me to share this PDF. So how can I share this PDF if it's possible? I mean, to everyone.
We can share this PDF after the webinar, maybe on Octopus.
Then I'll share that with you. So you can tell them that you'll get the citations.
Yes, we can hear you, Abhinav. So yeah,
yes,
this is fine.
So let's move on. There are a lot of questions. I mean, it's important to cover the topics also. A lot of questions. So any judgment for no notice to accuse at this stage? A lot of judgments are there. See, you'll have to do some research. I'll suggest. I mean, Harpreet Kaur has asked this question. No notice to the accused at the stage of 156. A lot of judgments. You'll have to do some research. You'll find a lot of judgments. It's a settled law that in practice also, there is no notice to the accused when you move your 156(3). In any case.
Right, Abhinav.
Yes, if you want to research on it, the keywords would be right to hearing and 156(3). These will be the keywords you can research on it. So let us come to the complaints procedure. Now, broadly speaking, I'm simplifying it. I'll again say there are many ifs and buts. In a criminal procedure or our code that has been envisaged, we of course, in order to initiate a criminal proceeding, we of course have this FIR process. You go to the police and the police registers an FIR, and then investigation takes place. There is another method by which you directly approach the magistrate under a complaints procedure, which is your chapter 15. It starts from section 200. Again, it's not important to read the section. You have to understand the concept. The concept is that you move a written complaint before the magistrate directly. The magistrate will look at your complaint, will tell you to come for pre-summoning evidence, examination on oath, your examination also, and also your witnesses, if there are any witnesses. He will tell you to give your pre-summoning evidence. And for this, the important sections are section 200, 201, 202, 3, and 204. These 5 sections are important. You can, for now, if you want to understand complaints procedure, 4-5 sections. Just go through these 4-5 sections. So you don't want to approach the police because you don't want investigation. You have all the documents with you, but you want to ensure that criminal proceedings are initiated. To directly move a complaint before the magistrate under section 200, That's the complaint procedure. Magistrate will direct you to come for pre-summoning evidence, your examination on oath, your witness examination, and then if required under section 202, there is a limited provision of inquiry or investigation. Scope of section 202 is also defined in several judgments, Supreme Court judgments, and the crux is the Honorable Supreme Court has held that 202 is a very uh, 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 limited section for the magistrate just to ascertain whether there is any prima facie case or not. That's so. This 202 investigation cannot be compared with your normal investigation that is done post registration of FIR. Then, if the magistrate, after your evidence, feels that this has to be dismissed, there is no case made out, he will dismiss it. For instance, let's say if there is a case of 420, section 420, if the magistrate feels that there is no inducement, there was no intention, dishonest intention, etc., etc., then the magistrate will say that I don't think there's any offense made out. It's purely a civil dispute, and there are, as far as the documents are also concerned, they are not in order, etc., etc. So I'm not ready to give you. I'm not ready to issue process against the accused person. So he will dismiss your complaint under section 203, or if he is convinced, then he will issue process. Or issue process would mean that he will issue notice to the accused persons under section 204 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. So if you broadly understand complaints procedure, it's another way given to a complainant or an informant to approach the magistrate and ensure that the accused is brought to face the trial. This is important. So, like for instance, if you see your check bounce cases, in check bounce cases, you draft your complaint, you give your pre-summoning evidence. On the basis of that pre-summoning evidence, the summons are issued. So that's a complaints procedure. So there is no registration of FIR. There is nothing, because you have the check, you have the transaction on against which that check was issued. You have the return memo of your bank saying that the check has been dishonored for so and so reason, and you have sent the legal notice also. Now these are the requirements of section 138. So in order to understand this, read section 138 of Negotiable Instruments Act also, because there's a procedure for it. So after that, court will see, okay, everything is in order, let me issue summons. So then he will issue summons. So this is a separate provision, complaints procedure. Let's come on to the next topic, which is the second FIR, and this is related to your complaints as well as the FIR. That in law, is there a provision for second FIR? In law, is there a provision for second complaint? Now, complaint would mean a complaint to the magistrate. There is a judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court, T.T. Antony versus State of Kerala. I'll share that judgment on the screen just to ensure you have the citations. Yes. Yes. So point 11, if you see T.T. Antony versus State of Kerala and others, 2001, 6 SCC 181, it's a Supreme Court judgment on second FIR. There are other judgments also, but you can read this for the time being. And what does it say? It says, again, crux of T.T. Antony is that second FIR in respect of the same incident or the same transaction or even different offenses committed in the course of the same transaction. Second FIR in these cases are not permissible. So for instance, practically if you see, if you have already told the police that so and so person was found dead on the road, and you give that information to the police and the police registers an FIR, subsequently you can't, another person cannot simply go to the police and give the same information, because you cannot initiate two criminal proceedings against an accused, right? It's again violates Article 21. So second FIR in relation to the same incident or the same offense or different offenses in committed in the course of the same transaction, they are not permissible. Now, Supreme Court has given another methodology. Of, I would say Supreme Court has further sort of refined it to say, or refined, I would say, has gone one step ahead to say that there is one consequence test also. What is that consequence test? If you read these judgments, you'll find that consequence test in one of the judgments. C. Muniappan is one of the judgments. Judgment may not be important for now. You'll have to understand the concept. C. Muniappan says, or the consequence test says, if the offense alleged in the second FIR arises as a consequence of the offense alleged in the first FIR. So, for instance, an incident taken place, an offense takes place, an FIR gets registered. Subsequently, another FIR or another offense takes place. Now, this offense is a consequence of the first offense. Then, in that case, also, both these offenses will be a part of one bunch, and there can only be just one FIR. So, a consequence test is also given by the Supreme Court. So, note, second FIR is not permissible in law. So, even if normally in practice, what happens is generally a second FIR is clubbed with the first FIR. But if there is a second FIR, that is liable to be quashed. The FIR is okay. Now, what about second complaint? The judgment for second complaint is Samta Naidu and another versus State of Madhya Pradesh and another, criminal appeal number so and so. Second complaint. This is the second complaint. For second complaint, the court has held, I mean, this is a very recent judgment, 2020, and it's a judgment which discusses all the other judgments, early judgments as well of the Honorable Supreme Court. It says that if your earlier disposal of the complaint that you had filed earlier, the disposal of that earlier complaint was on merits or in a manner known to law. So if your first complaint was adjudicated on merits, then second complaint is not permissible. You cannot simply go to the magistrate again and again with the same complaint and request the magistrate to initiate criminal proceedings. So if your first complaint has been decided on merits, second complaint on same facts, identical facts is not permissible, number one. Secondly, if your first complaint has been disposed of or dismissed on other grounds, for instance, it's not on merit, there is a default, complainant has not appeared, it has been dismissed, then you can obviously move a second complaint. So these two important points you can understand when you're reading this Samta Naidu and another versus State of Madhya Pradesh. So second complaint is also not permissible, subject to the disposal of the first complaint. So we have discussed 154. We've discussed FIR, how to approach the magistrate, Rinka Srivastav, and all the related concepts are clear. Let us come back to the FIR case. So there are two ways: FIR case and your complaints case. So let us focus on the FIR case for now. Your FIR is registered and investigation starts. Investigation will start after the registration of your FIR, leading up to submission of the final report or the charge sheet or the challan or the closure. So investigation will go on from FIR till final report, and of course there are some ifs and buts. Again, I'll discuss the concepts of further investigation and all also. So during investigation, the role of the magistrate becomes very important because he is now the supervisor of the functioning of the police during investigation, and more specifically the investigating officer, I would say. And as a complainant's lawyer, you must know what are the remedies available to you to ensure proper investigation. Because see, it's not about initiating investigation, you have to ensure that police does its job, and police on its own may not do its job. My practical experience says that. So you will have to ensure that police or the investigating officer will do his job. If I'm discussing if I'm discussing the role of magistrate during the investigation, you cannot discuss that without Sakiri Vasu. Sakiri Vasu, again, landmark judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. Sakiri Vasu versus State of Uttar Pradesh and others, 2008 to SCC 409 Supreme Court judgment. It actually expands the section 156.3 or the powers of the magistrate under section 156.3. Quickly, very simple concept. Supreme Court has talked about theory of implied powers, and if I have to further simplify it, is that 156.3, you used 156.3 for registration of FIR. Now you are using 156.3 for what? To ensure proper investigation. Supreme Court says that 156.3 is wide enough to include all such powers in a magistrate necessary for ensuring a proper investigation. That means the magistrate can do or should be able to do all those things to ensure proper investigation. Theory of implied powers, the concept is if you talk about the concept is when an act confers a jurisdiction on someone, it impliedly also grants the power to do all such acts and incidental powers to do that act or for its proper execution. So you will have to give all the powers to that person so that it can perform its work. So magistrate will have to the functioning of the magistrate cannot be restricted only for registration of FIR. You have to ensure that he supervises the investigation also. So that is where Sakiri Vasu came. And Supreme Court also said that why we are expanding the scope of 156.3 is because we don't want people to come or rush to the High Court or the Supreme Court for proper investigation and all those things. If you have any problem, you please approach the magistrate. So magistrate under 156.3 also exercises a supervisory role, and this role is very important. Now, a lot of people would ask me, what all can a magistrate do during investigation? Yes. Now, as a complainant lawyer, I am a person, who initiated the proceedings. I ensured that police registers the FIR. Now, I have to ensure that police investigates properly. So it's very easy to say that yes, move a 156.3 and ensure that police does its job. But what can you ask for in that application? What can you ask from the magistrate to ensure that proper investigation takes place? So couple of things that have happened in various cases is that many a times magistrate will direct the police officer to keep on filing status reports every month, every 20 days, 30 days, status reports. So status report, investigating officer will state that after the last hearing, I did this or I've been doing these things. So status report is one thing. It can also tell or pass orders in during the investigation to monitor the investigation. So calling for status report is also a kind of monitoring. Now, police, the magistrate can also recommend to the DCP or the SSP to change the investigating officer, or possibly ensuring that proper investigation takes place. And sometimes the magistrate can also tell the investigating officer to consider this material given by the complainant. Because many a time what happens is that as a complainant, when you assist the officer, he will not take your material because he feels that you want to somehow ensure that the accused goes to jail or it gets prosecuted. So there is a vested interest in you. But sometimes the courts say that this material is, you have to please take that material, apply your mind, and then you decide whether to take in that material or not. So he can call for status reports, he can monitor the investigation, he can recommend. Recommend word is important because he cannot change the investigating officer. He cannot tell a senior officer to direct a senior officer to investigate. He cannot transfer the investigation to some other agency. So these are the things he cannot do. But he can further he can give directions for further investigation as well. Now, a lot of people would ask me that if we can't do these things, who else will do it? So, of course, magistrate can do these things. Now, there are things which he can't do. So, somebody should be able to do those things. So, for those cases or for those issues, you generally people approach the Honorable High Court. And for what reliefs? Sometimes people want CBI investigation, transfer of investigation. Sometimes petitioners want a senior officer to head the investigation. Sometimes people want uh, uh, a special investigation team to be formed, constituted. Sometimes people want that that this investigating officer should not be changed. So, Honorable High Court, in exercise of their inherent powers, 482 CRPC, Section 482 CRPC, as well as 226, Article 226 of the Constitution of India. These are constitutional and inherent powers with the high courts to give these directions as well. So high courts can do this, but not the magistrate. So now investigation has taken place. A final report or a challan or a charge sheet is ready. Now, what is a challan? What is a charge sheet? Please go and look up section 173 of your Code of Criminal Procedure. I will again not read it. Section 173, I'll simplify it to all of you. Basically talks about a final report. After investigation, whatever evidence is there, whatever material is there, names of the accused persons, offenses under which those people have to be charge sheeted, etc. All these form a part of the final report, right? So final report will be submitted after investigation to the magistrate, concerned magistrate, again the Ilaka magistrate, and magistrate will have broadly two things to do. He can either accept that final report or the challan. So sometimes closure report is also filed. That according to police, no case is made out. So final report, let's say a report goes. It may be a closure report, it may be a charge sheet or a challan, let's say. Magistrate will have two options, a couple of options, broadly two, accept or reject, or final reports, actions pertaining to the final report, let's say. Let's talk about this way. Actions pertaining to the final report, actions pertaining to the closure report. Final report, he can accept the final report, take cognizance and issue summons to the accused. Again, cognizance and all those things are important. I'll again talk about cognizance and all later on. He can accept the final report, but direct further investigation. So he can accept the final report as it is, take cognizance, issue summons. He can accept the final report, but direct further investigation because he feels, magistrate feels that there is more in the case and police will have to investigate. Now, if a closure report is filed, magistrate can accept the closure report and close the case. Accept the closure report and close the case, or reject the closure report and take cognizance, or reject the closure report and direct further investigation. So these are the things. So these are the things which a magistrate can do. He can accept the final report, take cognizance. He can accept the final report, then direct further investigation. He can accept the closure report, close the case. He will reject the closure report and then possibly take cognizance. He can take cognizance even after rejecting the closure report. He can reject the closure report and then direct further investigation. So what is a final report? Basically, final report is nothing but an opinion of the investigating officer. Word is opinion. Is opinion of the investigating officer that these people have to be put on trial, and these are the documents. These are the documents. So, and this is your first charge sheet or the first final report. After investigation, the first thing that goes to the court, this is your first charge sheet. Now, I spoke of cognizance. Cognizance has also been defined by the Honorable Supreme Court, and again, it's important. Cognizance, after you file your final report or the charge sheet, the magistrate takes cognizance on that charge sheet. And more specifically, magistrate takes cognizance of the offense, but not of the offenders. So cognizance is of the offense, but not the offenders. What is cognizance? Cognizance would mean there's a judgment for that also, Supreme Court judgment, recent judgment, and it says when a magistrate takes judicial notice on a matter presented to it in order to decide whether there is a basis for initiating proceedings and determination of the cause or matter judicially. So basically a judicial notice by the magistrate, he applies his mind, takes judicial notice of the contents in the petition, and then he proceeds further. That is what cognizance is. Now cognizance is of course of the offense but not of the offenders. So cognizance takes place only after you file your charge sheet. Now cognizance as far as complaint case is concerned is slightly a tricky issue because a lot of people have this misconception that the moment magistrate directs you to section 200, he takes cognizance first and then directs you to section 200 or the complaints procedure. The Honorable Supreme Court in a recent judgment has sort of uh, uh, rejected that sort of proposal. So let me share that judgment with you. Wait. This point number 10, S.R. Sukumar versus S. Sunad Raghuram, 2059 SSC 609. So it talks about what cognizance is, and you must read that topic. It's an important topic. So I'll share that PDF with you later, not an issue. So cognizance has already been taken by the magistrate. And I've already told that final report is an opinion of the magistrate of the investigating officer, and the magistrate is not bound by that opinion. He can do whatever is possible in law. Now, if I'm talking about investigation or the moment case comes before the magistrate after investigation, couple of important points. Number one, there are three types of investigations. One is your initial investigation. Initial investigation means after registration of the FIR, and there has been no charge sheet filed in this case. So whatever happens after your registration of FIR is your initial investigation. Then there is a concept of further investigation which takes place after the filing of the charge sheet or the final report. So one report is already there before the magistrate, and the police is further investigating. Third is fresh investigation or de novo investigation or de-investigation. As far as further investigation is concerned, section 173(8) you must check. It's an important section, and a recent judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court has sort of relayed the law on one further investigation, and I'll discuss that also very briefly. So further investigation is when a charge sheet has already been filed, and police wants to further investigate. Earlier, the view was that when the magistrate takes cognizance, once he has taken cognizance, he cannot give direction for further investigation. So there were conflicting judgments. So some of the judgments said that he can do that. Some of them said no. Case of Mr. Let me see. So a recent case of Vinubhai Haribhai Malviya, Supreme Court, and I'll share that citation with you. Yes. So this is the citation. Vinubhai, point number 3, Vinubhai Haribhai Malviya and others versus State of Gujarat and others, 2019 SEC Online Supreme Court. So powers of the magistrate in directing further investigation. In this, the Supreme Court has very clearly read your section 173(8) with section 156(3) of the Code of Criminal Procedure, saying that even after you have taken cognizance, the magistrate, he can still direct further investigation, because again I said Article 21. So in order to resolve any ambiguity, look at Article 21, because free and fair trial has to be there. You cannot overlook any evidence. Earlier, what the police used to do was that the police would file a charge sheet or a final report, and magistrate, because the magistrate has already taken cognizance, magistrate could not suo moto direct further investigation. So therefore, Supreme Court saw all that and said that even after you've taken cognizance, the magistrate can still direct further investigation. So this judgment becomes very important. You must see that. Yes. Now, so in this judgment, the Supreme Court read Sakiri Vasu into 173(8) to say that you have to expand the powers under 156(3). So right now, if you want further investigation on your matter, you will move an application under section 173 for further investigation. You can do that now. And you can title your application in such a way: application under section 156(3) read with section 173(8), and you can demand further investigation from the magistrate. The third investigation which I talked about was fresh or de novo investigation. Now, fresh or de novo investigation would mean that your earlier investigation has to be set aside because it was ex specie malafide. It was bad. It was tainted, etc., etc. Because this can also happen in a criminal trial, that your investigation is corrupted. It's defective, totally defective. In that case, the courts can set aside the entire investigation and order for re-investigation, fresh investigation. So the question is, who can do that? Magistrate cannot do that. You will have to go to the High Court for fresh investigation, de novo investigation, or re-investigation. And again, Section 482 CRPC and your Article 226 will come into play for a fresh or de novo investigation. Magistrate cannot do that, because you have to understand. See, when you have read a lot of criminal law, you will see that the powers of the magistrate are such and have been codified in such a way and interpreted in various judgments, that magistrate is bound by the Code of Criminal Procedure. Magistrate cannot do anything beyond that. So there are no inherent powers available with the magistrate. So inherent powers, section 482, so obviously 226 is not available with the magistrate. So there is no concept of inherent powers with the magistrate. Whatever little relaxation is there, 156(3) and all those sections are there. Courts have interpreted these sections in such a way so as to give more powers to the magistrate, but it's not possible to read things which are not in the code to be the powers of the magistrate. So therefore, I would say many a times we also feel that the magistrate cannot do a lot of things. For instance, if you want to ensure proper investigation and you move these applications, and the magistrate also gives directions and calls for status reports and all those things, many a times we face a lot of difficulty because uh, the need of the hour is to change the investigating agency. Need of the hour is to change the investigating officer. Need of the hour is to ensure that a senior level officer investigates the offense because the offense might be complex. And I had some personal problem experience also with this. So in that case, when you approach the High Court, many a times High Court will not entertain your petitions under 482 or possibly 226, and it can always say that you please approach the magistrate under 156.3 because an alternate remedy is there, Sakiri Vasu is there, and all those judgments are there. So this happens many times. So we feel that either the High Court should be generous and should accept and should understand, or else some more powers be given to the magistrate, and this will develop slowly. I mean, you cannot expect things to come up instantly. So these are the problems. So in order to understand investigation, further investigation, and then your or fresh investigation, you please look at this point 4 Vinay Tyagi versus Irshad Ali and others, 2013 5 SCC 762, which talks about these kinds of investigation. So it categorizes. But in order to understand the recent development in law as far as further investigation is concerned, please read this Vinu Bhai Hari Bhai Malaviya. It's a recent judgment, and I would say it's been a good judgment. See, there'll be a lot of people criticizing one way or the other. I can understand that, and people should criticize. I'm open to that, but it's a good judgment which I feel has given in extra powers to the magistrate, because further investigation is also an important topic, and more so when you are a complainant's lawyer and you feel that the police is not working. So now when I talked about going to the High Court or approaching the High Court, or invoking inherent powers of the High Court for transfer of investigation and all those things, this is the judgment which is, it's a good judgment, Rabia and others versus NCT of Delhi. This is a Delhi High Court judgment. It relied on a Supreme Court judgment, State of West Bengal and others versus Committee for Protection of Democratic Rights, West Bengal, 2010 3 SCC 571. So you must read Rabia and others versus NCT of Delhi, and it talks about the transfer of investigation. Very good judgment. You must read this. You can read this also. So and along with Vinay Tyagi and Vinu Bhai. So these judgments will tell you what are the powers for investigation, fresh investigation, or re-investigation, or further investigation. The courts, especially in the point 7, Rabia and others, and also the state of West Bengal, has held that courts in exercise of its constitutional powers can direct the CBI to take up investigation. 226 Article 226 is of wide amplitude. So these are constitutional powers. Article 226 is a constitutional power. There cannot be any restriction to it. So courts have held that yes, you can do anything. Of course, facts and circumstances have to be seen, but you can change the investigating officer. All those things you can do. So a magistrate will have a limited role, but you can do that. So courts can that give, even High Court can give direction for further investigation. High Court can set up an SIT. High Court can transfer the investigation to CBI or possibly some other investigating agency. May order fresh investigation also. May direct a senior officer to supervise or possibly investigate this offense. All these things can be done by the Honorable High Court. And yes, so I think I've covered most of the topics, but I'll just because this is one very important topic. So Asian Resurfacing of Road Agency Private Limited, it's also 2018 recent judgment. Lot of issues were discussed in this judgment. Again, a lengthy judgment written by Justice Adarsh Goyal and Justice Nariman. One point is that it talks about stay of the trial proceedings. Stay of the trial proceedings. Quick points. You can read the judgment yourself. Quick points. Number one, whenever you are asking for, and mind you, this judgment was written in context of Section 19 of the Prevention of Corruption Act. So in Section 19 of the Prevention Corruption Act, there's a specific provision for not staying the trial proceedings, and there were some the other issues as well, interlocutory orders and all those things. Whether charges framing order is an interlocutory order, you can read for your reading. As far as stay of the trial proceedings is concerned, the Honorable Supreme Court held that courts can grant stay of the trial proceedings, especially in this case, Prevention of Corruption Act, depending on the facts and circumstances of the case. But once stay has been granted, it will go up to 6 months. After 6 months, it will automatically be vacated. If you want to get your stay extended, you will have to approach the honorable courts. Courts will apply their mind through a speaking order, reasoned order, extend your stay. So it says that you cannot simply stay the proceedings and the case gets stayed for like 5 years. Once stay has been granted only for 6 months, it will stay there for 6 months, automatically vacated after 6 months. If you want to get it extended, you will have to approach the honorable courts again, High Court and the Supreme Court, get your stay extended. So this was the import of Asian resurfacing. Very good judgment, you should read it. If you are practicing criminal law, it's a good judgment, you must read that. My last topic is, and I'll try to cover it, it's a practical topic. A lot of people have asked me, and this is my experience, how to draft a 156.3. I will not talk about things which people already know. Whenever you are drafting your 156.3 for registration of FIR, right? Your police station has not registered the FIR. You approach the DCP, he has not registered the FIR. Then you approach the magistrate for registration of FIR. How to draft that? First of all, you have to understand the facts of your case. Sit with your client. You will have to understand all the facts. Once you've understood the facts, yes. So once you've understood the facts, you open your Indian Penal Code. There are various chapters, various sections. You go through all these sections. See if your facts or your offense matches with any of these sections. See which are cognizable offenses, which are non-cognizable offenses. See everything. Then you sort out all those sections which are important for your facts or in respect of your facts. Then you start drafting your 156.3. A general drafting would be memo of parties will include your SHO, the police, DCP also. You may make DCP also as a party, not an issue. Then you may also add accused persons in the memo of parties, because sometimes, in practice, the magistrate would tell you to do that, although notice will not be issued to the accused. You start with your introductory para, your facts will come, and then afterwards you can possibly discuss some of these sections. Don't have to be you don't have to go into each and every section in detail. Don't have to use a commentary for that. Just highlight that for this fact, this section is applicable. For the facts disclose these sections, and after that you will seek prayers for direction to for registration of FIR and all those things. Ensure that you have gone to the police thana as well as the DCP before you do that. An affidavit will be annexed with it, or it will be on affidavit. This application will be on affidavit. Ensure, and this is very important, ensure that you need police investigation. If you will draft your case in such a way that you have everything, but you still want FIR, court will direct you to the complaints procedure. Court will not waste time in direction for registration of FIR. If you have all the material, all the documents with you, and still you want investigation, because if you have everything, why will you want investigation? Police will waste possibly 6 months to 1 year or possibly 2 years more on investigating the offense. So if you have all the documents, then FIR route is not advisable. Ensure that you need police investigation for that, and you also ensure that you write certain points or paras in your 156.3 stating that in this recovery of money is involved. You should also write, yes, in this um, uh, uh, the the accused person can flee from the jurisdiction of the police, or they can flee the country. Or you can mention that recovery of money is involved. You can say some material has to be seized, etc., etc. And the possibly the material is in possession of the accused. If the material is in possession of the accused, it becomes difficult for me to sort of proceed with the complaints case. So likewise, you will draft your 156.3 affidavit has to be there. Ensure that you have approached the police station as well as this thing, and then ensure that you need police investigation as well. And then you move your application. On the very first day, status report will be called from the an order will be passed calling for a status report from the police station or the concerned SHO. The police officer or the concerned investigating officer on the next date will share that status report, that this is what I've done, my preliminary inquiry and possibly steps that he had taken. And for him, these are the reasons why he does not want to register an FIR. And then the matter gets listed for arguments on registration of FIR. On that day, you have to be ready with your IPC. You have to be ready with your judgments if possible, and IPC judgments as well as CRPC judgments if other questions of law are involved. Lalita Kumari, Sakiri Vasu, these obviously will become more important. And then you argue your 156. So this is how I feel you should draft. Again, I cannot teach you each and everything here. I've given you a broad sort of this thing, how to draft, or possibly I've also discussed briefly these concepts. Overall, again, I'll say if pre-trial means whatever happens before the trial, before before charges are framed, everything that happens before charges are framed. It starts from the registration of FIR. Investigation takes place. Investigating officer will have an important role. Then you will have a role in order to ensure proper investigation. Concepts of zero FIR, Lalita Kumari, mandatory registration of FIR, Sakiri Vasu 156.3, and how it was expanded. Then to ensure proper investigation, charge sheet gets filed. If you're not satisfied, you move a protest petition that I don't agree with this charge sheet. He has not investigated on these aspects. You can also ask for further investigation. In the meantime, during investigation, you can again move your 156.3. You can call for status reports. You can ensure that investigating officer does his work. Once you do all this, final report, magistrate is not bound by the opinion of the uh, um, uh, investigating officer. And then once final report is submitted, let's say if the investigation is complete and you are also happy, cognizance is taken. Cognizance I've already defined. Taking judicial notice in order to proceed further, applying your mind, cognizance of the offense, not the offender. Then you proceed further, and then you issue summons to the accused, and then charges will be framed and all those things. If sometimes what happens is that the police will submit his charge sheet without arresting the accused. So in the charge sheet, it will be written charge sheeted without arrest. If he is charge sheeted without arrest, subsequently when summons are issued, you will have to move bail applications and ensure that your client gets bail. So, and then subsequently charges are framed. The moment charges are framed, your trial starts. So as per Hardeep Singh versus State of Punjab, trial will start when the charges are framed. Now, um, let us see a couple of questions if I can have. So there's this thing also. Yes, of course, I'll share the PDF of these citations. Yes. Advisable interlocutory, any ruling that. So see, a lot of you have asked questions for which I would suggest you do your research. I mean, you will, in order to understand what is an interlocutory order, you will, again, I will direct you to Asian Resurfacing, because this is where the Honorable Supreme Court in a 3 judges bench has gone into what's an interlocutory order and what's not. So I will request you to read that judgment first, and then you, if you have any specific queries, you can always research on those queries. I mean, do you think accused of rape is considered as innocent until it is on ground level? So I have not understood this question. A basic fundamental principle of a criminal law is that the person is innocent unless proven other. What degree of crimes can be? It has to be a cognizable offense. That's it. You must read that Kirti Vashish judgment. Does online there are judgments. There are judgments to say that police has to give you a copy of the FIR, and they have to. The person who is filing his complaint, he must get a copy of the this thing. What is the difference between a complaint and FIR? So I've already discussed that. I think the question was asked at 5:12 p.m. So I've already discussed in detail. Sir, could you please share a specimen of an FIR with us? Lot of FIRs you'll find online. I mean, you simply search for. I'll tell you. You simply search for integrated investigating forms 1, Roman 1. You will find the standard format of an FIR. On top of it, it will be written section 154, and different columns will be there. So, likewise, you can have a most of the websites, police websites will have a provision for downloading of the FIR. You can just download one of the FIRs and see uh, how does it look like. Sir, many a times police are not aware and well versed with the sections of the offences. Then what will happen on the first day of the appearance of the accused before found to be incorrect? Many a times police are not aware and well versed with this section. What will happen on the first day? So you can see there's a process you have to understand. I think Tanuj is back, right?
That's okay. So Abhinav, I was wondering that, since there are so many questions,
Yes.
It will not be possible to sort of address, many.
Yes.
And a lot of them actually have been covered in the presentation.
Yes.
A lot of them, as you have said, require maybe independent research as well.
Yes.
So that's crucial. I hope these webinars, they sort of ignite interest among students and young lawyers to do their own research as well.
Yes.
Not everything can be covered in this time.
Because these questions are very specific, as in this is somewhat like reading a case, facts of the case, and then answering what will happen.
Right.
So we spend a lot of time when a case comes, and we have to strategize. So you have to find answers. I mean, this is what the job is as a lawyer.
Some of you have asked, can we share the PDF? Of course, we will be sharing this PDF. We can upload it on Octopus with Abhinav's permission. And Abhinav has already said that, we can. So we will send it across to you. We have been recording this video and, we will make it available on YouTube. Just give us some time to figure out the logistics for that. It's pretty simple, straightforward thing to do.
Okay.
And we will do that. Yeah, Abhinav, and some questions, were about regarding career in criminal law as well. Though that's again, out of scope. But being a career website, a lot of students have this, or readers, they have this question. if you could quickly tell maybe, some, maybe last words by you on criminal law.
See, first of all, yes, first of all, what I feel is that you should not you should not be very specific with respect to your career initially, because initially you must learn different fields of law. That's, I've said it many a times, I will say it again. In fact, in one of the interviews of Mr. Luthra, I've read that he says, and according to him, you please cross check it. I mean, that's, I read it long time back. He says that you must practice civil trial or civil law before venturing into criminal law. And I would build on it to say that initially, when you are entering this profession, you must learn and practice different fields of law before thinking of getting into criminal law, because these different fields of law will give you that experience of different forums, different propositions of law. And many a time what happens is that when you're arguing a matter, you sometimes import concepts from other fields, other aspects of law into your arguments or in your petitions in criminal law. And I've done that many times. For instance, let's say when you are, let's say if you are arguing before the Supreme Court, let's say Honorable Supreme Court, and an interpretation of statutes or interpretation of law is involved, that in that case you cannot simply say that I will read only those judgments of interpretation which are specific to criminal law. You can't do that. So you, as far as interpretation of a law is concerned, it could be in civil side also and criminal side also. So that wide reading has to be there initially, I would say. And of course, if you want to be a criminal lawyer, I would suggest criminal manual is one thing that you must have, and you must understand it. You don't have to simply read the sections, because you will never understand the sections if you're not working, or if you're not working with a criminal lawyer. The best thing what you can do is you can go and sit in the district courts, high courts, and Supreme Court also, criminal roster in Supreme Court, criminal rosters in high court, and magistrates in the district courts. Sit there, see how things work, because the trial process or the functioning of the subordinate judiciary is unlike your practice in High Court and the Supreme Court. In High Court and Supreme Court, things are slightly simplified, but on a mature level, I would say. So sit there, spend your time, see how things work, because there are a lot of things. I mean, you have to fill up a bail bond, how to do that. People will have small queries. I mean, I am also learning. It's not that I've learned everything and then I've come here. So I am also learning, but the fact is that initially don't restrict your scope. Read everything. You have to read civil law as well. You must read that, because you must understand how civil trial works, or possibly um, civil cases in High Court and the Supreme Court. Then start reading your criminal manual, understand your criminal manual, have a commentary, a good commentary, keep that commentary with you, and then your research. I mean, this research has to be very good, and you have to be extremely patient. I would say extremely patient. You will not be able to succeed in litigation if you are not patient, and you will not earn anything initially. Many a times I had like 50 to 100 rupees in my bank account, but I've gone through that.
Avinav, some of them have been asking for a good criminal manual as well, like a suggestion for a book, maybe. If
Yes,
you
I mean,
could type it out in the chat box, please.
yes. Yes. Should I answer it in the chat?
If you could type out the name of the book and the author.
Universal's, you can see Universal's criminal manual, and also any criminal EBC's manual will also be fine. I mean, any manual would be any. But these are the only available in the market generally. I mean,
Right.
so, sections are the same.
Universals are trusted publishers as well. So
Yes. Sections are the same. So I mean, they'll only print those sections and compile it in a book.
right. So some of you have been asking about, how good is criminal law as a career. We'll do more sessions on this. Abhinav, some people are requesting you to switch from advocacy to being a professor. A lot of them are requesting for other sessions by you. So please do consider that. Loctopus is open for you as a platform to come. Yeah. Uh, yeah, and everyone, we have also shared, our LinkedIn profile links with all of you. If you're interested, you can connect with Abhinav, you can connect with me. We'll be happy to, network with you, guide you through. Abhinav, as you can see, is a master of criminal law. Please do reach out to him.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, we come to a close. Abhinav, thanks a lot for the wonderful session.
Welcome. And thank you for giving me this opportunity, I would say, and organizing this, because organizing this is a painful.
Right. No, it's a very enjoyable thing. It's very satisfying as well.
Yes, yes.
So thank you everyone for joining in. We have received excellent comments from a lot of you, very encouraging comments, all the way to Nepal as well. There was one comment from someone in Nepal.
Thank
So
you.
great that we are reaching here as well. Thank you everyone for your time. Please do stay in touch. As we said, the video will be made available on Loctopus. Abhinav's that PDF containing a list.
I'll share that PDF.
That will also make it available. Do stay in touch. Keep joining other webinars of ours as well. We have something tomorrow which we are doing with Surana and Surana, which is on the future of legal education, especially due to coronavirus. There is a series of webinars we are doing with Surana and Surana. Please do check it out. If it's of interest, do join. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Abhinav.
Okay, see you.
And everyone, please just stay safe and stay at your home.
Yes, that's more important.
You have some way to go. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.